My older brother controlled what I ate growing up. My parents called it letting the eldest lead. Now, they need financial help, and he's broke. So, I took over on my terms. I've been sitting on this for about 3 weeks, and honestly, I don't know if I'm looking for validation, perspective, or maybe a bit of both. Maybe I just need to get it out of my head and onto a screen. So here goes. I'm Cole, 31 years old. I work as a budget analyst for a municipal government office. Basically, I review departmental spending, flag budget overruns, build forecasts, and explain to people why they can't buy a new copier after they've already exceeded their quarterly allocation. It's not exactly glamorous. Nobody at a party is impressed when I tell them what I do. But I'm good at it. I've been promoted twice in 6 years, and it pays well enough that I own a condo, drive a sensible car, and have a savings account with actual savings in it. That last part matters for this story. Let me tell you about my brother. His name is Graham. He's 35. Growing up, everyone in my family called him the King. Not as a joke, seriously. My parents, Ray and Donna, treated Graham like the firstborn son in some medieval line of succession. Whatever Graham wanted, Graham got. And it wasn't subtle. It was built into the structure of our family. It was the operating system of our household. Here's how it worked. Every night my mom would ask Graham what he wanted for dinner. Not what the family wanted, what Graham wanted. He'd say chicken tenders and fries, so that's what we ate. If I suggested something different, spaghetti, tacos, literally anything else, my mom would say, Graham already picked, honey, every single night for years. I ate chicken tenders and fries so many times between the ages of 6 and 14 that I still can't look at a chicken tender without feeling a little resentment. And yeah, I know that sounds ridiculous, but live through it for 8 years and tell me you wouldn't develop complicated feelings about breaded poultry. It wasn't just dinner. Graham chose what we watched on TV. If I was already sitting on the couch watching something and fully invested in it, Graham could walk in and change the channel. No discussion. If I complained, my dad would say, let your brother watch what he wants, Cole. He's older. Graham got the larger bedroom. Graham got the front seat in the car. Graham got first choice of everything at Christmas, even when gifts were supposedly meant for both of us. One year, my grandma gave us a gaming console and 2 controllers as a joint gift. Graham took the console into his room, and I ended up with a controller that had nothing to connect to. I asked my mom about it, and she said, Graham's room is bigger. It makes sense for it to be in there. I asked, can I at least play it sometimes? She said, of course. Just ask your brother. So I asked Graham. He said, no. My parents had a phrase they used all the time, letting the eldest lead. They said it as if it were a legitimate parenting philosophy, like they'd read it in a book somewhere. We believe in letting the eldest lead. It teaches responsibility. Except, it didn't teach Graham responsibility. It taught Graham that the world rearranged itself around his preferences, and it taught me that mine didn't matter. I remember being around 9 or 10 and asking my mom why Graham always got to choose dinner. She knelt down and said, when you're the older one, someday you'll understand. Which didn't even make sense. I was never going to be older than Graham. That's not how time works. But she said it with such certainty that I just nodded and went back to my room. That's the first time I can remember thinking, okay, this is just how things are. Nobody's going to change it. I need to figure out how to work around it. As a side note, I want to be fair to my parents. They weren't cruel. They genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. My dad grew up in a household where the oldest child had authority, and he thought that's simply how families were supposed to function. My mom followed his lead because she followed his lead on most things. They're not villains. They're just people who chose a system with a very obvious winner and a very obvious loser, and never stopped to consider which one I was. I could give you 100 examples, but I'll stick to the ones that stayed with me the most. When Graham turned 16, he got a car. Used, sure, but still a car. When I turned 16, I got nothing. I asked about it. My dad said, we can't afford 2 cars for 2 kids, Cole. Graham needs his for work. Graham worked part-time at a sporting goods store. I also had a job, bussing tables at a diner on weekends. But Graham needed the car. I rode my bike or got rides from friends. When it came time for college, Graham went to a 4-year university. My parents covered part of his tuition, not all of it, but a substantial amount, enough that he graduated with a manageable level of debt. When I started applying to schools, my dad sat me down and said, "We've used up most of what we set aside on Graham's education. You're going to need to figure out a lot of this yourself." I said, "Okay." What else was I supposed to say? I attended community college for 2 years, transferred to a state school, worked 2 jobs the entire time, and earned a degree in accounting and public administration. I paid for almost all of it myself. I graduated with some student loans, but nothing I couldn't handle. Want to know the real kicker? When Graham graduated from college, my parents hosted a barbecue. The whole family was invited. My uncle brought a cake. My dad gave a speech about how proud he was. When I graduated, my parents came to the ceremony, applauded, took a photo, and then we went to a chain restaurant afterward. My mom said, "We're proud of you, Cole." And that was it. No barbecue, no speech, no cake. Just a photo and a plate of mozzarella sticks at a chain restaurant that I ended up paying for because nobody reached for the check and I didn't want to sit there in awkward silence. Alright, I'm jumping in here. This isn't Cole talking, this is me. This guy paid for his own graduation dinner after paying for his own education, after riding a bike because his brother needed the car, while his parents threw Graham a barbecue complete with a cake and a speech. That's not favoritism. That's a caste system inside a house. They called it letting the eldest lead. What it really meant was a blank check for Graham and an empty plate for Cole. I'm calling Graham the king, crowned at birth. Never earned it. And Cole? He's been keeping the kingdom running from the shadows without anyone noticing. After college, I moved to a different city. Not far, about 2 hours away, but far enough that I was no longer in Graham's orbit. And honestly, that distance saved me. Because once I was out of that house, I realized something that I think a lot of people in situations like mine eventually realize. I was actually pretty capable, really capable. All those years of figuring things out on my own, budgeting minimum wage paychecks, cooking my own meals because nobody was making what I wanted, repairing my bike because nobody was driving me anywhere. Those things turned into real-life skills. I knew how to manage money because I'd never had any extra. I knew how to plan because nobody was planning for me. I knew how to stay disciplined because discipline was the only thing I could control. About a year after graduating, I landed my first real job at the municipal office. I started as a junior analyst. Within 2 years, I had been promoted. Within 4 years, I was managing the largest departmental budgets in the office. My boss, a guy named Phil who has been doing this for 26 years, told me once that I had the best instincts for money of anyone he'd ever worked with. I didn't tell him those instincts came from a childhood spent watching resources flow towards someone else and learning how to survive on whatever remained. Meanwhile, Graham was living exactly the way you'd expect someone to live after never being told no. He got a decent job after college, a sales position with a company that sold industrial equipment. He made decent money. But Graham spent money like he was still the king. A new apartment in a trendy neighborhood, a new car every 3 years, expensive clothes, gadgets, and restaurant meals, 5 nights a week. For a while, he was dating a woman named Natalie, who had spending habits very similar to his. Together, they went through money like it was a competitive event. When Natalie left after 3 years, not relevant to this story, but she left, Graham didn't slow down his spending. If anything, it got worse. I think he was trying to fill some kind of void, but I'm not qualified to say that with certainty. The point is, Graham was living large and saving nothing, and I knew that because my mom would occasionally mention it in that worried but not actually doing anything about it tone. She'd say things like, "Graham's been a little tight on money lately," or "Graham had to put some things on his credit cards." I'd nod and say nothing because what was I supposed to say? "I told you so?" That's not my style. I just filed the information away. I should also mention that throughout all of this, my parents were still treating Graham like the king. When Graham needed a cosigner for his apartment, my dad signed. When Graham's car lease ended and he decided he wanted a nicer one, my parents helped with the down payment. When Graham mentioned wanting to take a vacation to the Caribbean, my mom gave him $1,000 to help cover the trip. Every time I heard about things like that, I'd think, they paid for part of his college, co-signed his apartment, helped fund his vacations, and when I needed money for textbooks during my sophomore year, my dad told me to check whether the library had copies. I'm not saying this to sound bitter. Okay, maybe a little bitter. But mostly I'm saying it because the context matters for what happened next. There was one moment that pretty much captured the entire dynamic. I was around 25, home for a holiday weekend visit. Graham was there too. We were all sitting in the living room when my dad asked what we should order for lunch. Graham said, "Pizza. Extra pepperoni." My dad picked up the phone and started placing the order. I said, "Actually, could we do half with mushrooms? I don't really eat pepperoni anymore." Graham looked at me like I'd suggested we start eating the furniture. My dad, already holding the phone to his ear, said, "Graham already called it, just pick off what you don't want." I was 25 years old, a college graduate, a working adult, and I was still being told to pick the pepperoni off my pizza. I laughed about it later, but at the time it hurt more than it should have because it confirmed something I'd known for years. Nothing had changed. And it probably never would. Time out. Let me run the numbers because that's what Cole does for a living. Graham's tally: college tuition assistance, a graduation barbecue complete with a cake, a co-signed apartment, a car down payment, $1,000 toward a Caribbean vacation, and a lifetime of eating whatever he wanted. Cole's tally: a bike, a plate of mozzarella sticks he paid for himself, and, "You're going to need to figure this out yourself." Graham got the royal treatment. Cole got a crash course in survival economics. And here's the twist: the survival course turned out to be worth more. Cole ended up with a career, a condo, and savings. The king ended up living in a castle built on credit card debt. The kid who got nothing wound up with everything. Fast forward to about 6 months ago, my dad, Ray, retired. He had worked at the same company for 32 years as a floor supervisor at a manufacturing plant. It was a good job and a steady paycheck, but not the kind of position that builds generational wealth. My mom, Donna, had been working part-time in billing at a dentist's office, but she started having trouble with her knees and couldn't stay on her feet for long periods. A couple of months after my dad retired, she retired too. Here's the problem. My parents hadn't planned well for retirement. They had some savings, a small pension from my dad's job, and Social Security, but it wasn't enough. Years of co-signing for Graham, helping Graham, and supporting Graham's lifestyle had eaten into the money they should have been saving. I don't think they fully understood how much until they finally sat down and looked at the numbers. One evening, my mom called me. I could hear it in her voice before she even said anything. That specific tone parents get when they need help, but don't want to come right out and ask for it. She said, "Cole, your father and I have been going over our finances and things are tighter than we expected." I asked if she'd spoken to Graham about it. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Graham is dealing with his own situation right now." Translation: Graham is broke. As it turned out, dealing with his own situation was a generous way of saying Graham had roughly $47,000 in credit card debt, a car payment he could barely keep up with, and an apartment lease he was locked into for another 8 months at a rent that consumed about 60% of his take-home pay. The king wasn't just broke, he was drowning, and apparently this wasn't new. He'd been sinking for at least 2 years while keeping it hidden from everyone. My parents only found out when they asked him for help, and he broke down and told them everything. Let me sit with that for a second. They went to Graham first. Of course they did. He's the king, the eldest, the one they invested in, the one who was supposed to lead. And when they finally went to that investment expecting a return, they discovered the entire portfolio was underwater. So they called me. The backup plan, the second choice. The kid who rode a bike and paid for his own mozzarella sticks. And look, I want to be honest. When my mom called, there was a part of me, a small, petty, very human part, that thought, "So now you call Cole. Now I'm worth talking to." Now that the king's treasury was empty, the second son got a phone call. I'm not proud of that thought, but I'd be lying if I said it never crossed my mind. It crossed my mind, and then it sat down and stayed for a while. My mom asked if I could maybe help with some of their monthly expenses, just until they figured things out. I told her I needed some time to think about it. She said, "Okay." I could tell she was embarrassed. My dad got on the phone for a moment and said, "We wouldn't ask if we didn't need to, Cole." That was hard to hear, not because they were asking, but because I could hear in his voice that asking me specifically, me, was difficult for him. Like turning to the backup plan meant admitting that the original plan had failed, and the original plan had always been Graham. I took a week. I wasn't delaying out of spite. I took the time because I wanted to approach it the right way. This is literally what I do for a living. I analyze budgets, I identify inefficiencies, I create plans. If my parents needed financial help, I wasn't going to just throw money at the situation. I was going to solve the problem. Hold on. They went to Graham first, the king. The man carrying $47,000 in credit card debt. The man whose financial strategy was spending like royalty and saving like it was optional. They went to him before they went to Cole, the actual budget analyst. The guy whose entire profession revolves around making numbers work. That's like having a flat tire, walking past a mechanic and asking the guy doing donuts in the parking lot for help. When that failed, they called Cole like he was roadside assistance they forgot they had. Maybe help a little. Ma'am, your firstborn is $47,000 underwater. This isn't a little help situation. This is a full-scale rescue operation, and you just called the only person qualified to run it. I drove down on a Saturday and sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Graham used to decide what everyone ate for dinner. I brought my laptop, a notepad, and a printed spreadsheet. My mom made coffee. My dad sat across from me wearing that expression people get when they're trying to hold on to their pride while circumstances are steadily pulling it away. I said, before we start, I want to be clear about something. I'm going to help, but I'm going to help the way I know how. That means I need to see everything. Income, expenses, debts, all of it. And I need honesty. No hiding things, no sugarcoating. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. My dad nodded. My mom said, of course, sweetheart. So we spent 3 hours reviewing their finances. 3 hours. And what I found was exactly what I expected. Except worse. Their savings were nearly gone. My dad's pension covered about 40% of their monthly expenses. Social Security helped, but there were still significant gaps. They still had a balance remaining on the house. Years earlier, they'd refinanced it, partly to help pay for Graham's college, which was a particularly interesting detail to discover in real time. Medical bills were beginning to pile up because of my mom's knee problems. And even after retiring, even while their own finances were deteriorating, they had continued sending money to Graham, because the king still needed an allowance. Honestly, that part almost broke me. I had to put my pen down and take a second. I sat there staring at a bank statement showing a $500 transfer to Graham made 2 months after they retired. $500 they didn't have. Sent to a grown man who should have been the one helping them. My mom noticed me looking at it and said quietly, "He said he needed it for rent." I didn't respond. I simply circled it in red and kept going. When everything was finally laid out, I closed my laptop and looked at both of them. I said, "Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll cover the gap in your monthly expenses, but not indefinitely. I'm going to build you a budget, a real one, and we're going to stick to it. I'll manage the payments, set up automatic transfers, and review everything monthly. But there are conditions." My dad raised his eyebrows. He's not used to conditions, especially not from me. I said, first, no more money to Graham. None. Not $5, not $500. If Graham needs financial help, he comes to me, and I'll determine whether it's a genuine need or just a habit. Second, I get full visibility into your accounts. I'm not going to micromanage your grocery shopping, but I need to know where the money is going so I can keep everything on track. Third, if Graham wants to be involved in this process, he's welcome to be involved, but he follows the same rules. No special treatment. The room became very quiet. My mom looked at my dad. My dad looked down at the table. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear a neighbor's dog barking 2 houses away. The Feldman's dog. That dog has been barking ever since I was 12. I'm convinced it's immortal. Finally, my dad said, "That seems fair." My mom nodded. And just like that, for the first time in my entire life, I was the one making the decisions. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It didn't feel like revenge. I know some people might read this and assume I was on some kind of power trip, the overlooked kid finally getting a chance to call the shots. But that wasn't it. It felt more like, I don't know. Like I was finally being recognized for what I'm actually good at. My whole life, my parents looked at Graham and saw a leader. They looked at me and saw the other one. Now they were sitting across from me asking for help, and I was the only person in the family who could actually provide it. Not because I'm smarter than Graham, but because I'd spent 31 years building the skills that being overlooked forces you to develop. I got everything set up over the next 2 weeks. I built a spreadsheet. Obviously, it's me. I automated their bill payments, created a separate account for my contributions so every transaction could be tracked, canceled a few subscriptions they'd forgotten they were paying for, and found them a better car insurance rate by shopping around. Small changes, but the kind that add up. Budget analyst stuff. After the first month, my mom called and said, "Cole, this is the first time in years I haven't been stressed about money." I said, "Good. That's the job." Now here's where things got interesting. Graham found out. Of course he did. My mom mentioned it. She probably couldn't help herself. She told him I was helping with the finances and that they'd put a system in place. He called me that same night. He was furious, not just irritated. Furious. His voice had that edge to it. The same edge it used to have when we were kids and I touched the TV remote without permission. He said, "Cole, what is this about you managing mom and dad's money?" I said, "It's exactly what it sounds like." He said, "Why wasn't I involved in this decision?" I said, "You were $47,000 in debt when they asked you for help. That's why." There was a long silence. He didn't have a response for that. Numbers are difficult to argue with. Then he said something I still replay in my head. "So what? I have to go through you now if I need something from them?" I said, "If you need money from our retired parents who are living on a fixed income, yes. You come to me and I'll tell you whether there's room in the budget." He went quiet again. Then he said, "This is ridiculous. You're not in charge of this family." I said, "Nobody's in charge of the family, Graham. But somebody has to be in charge of the budget and you're not exactly qualified." He hung up on me, which was fine. I've been hung up on before. Not by many people, but Graham's done it at least 3 times in my life. Every time was when he didn't get what he wanted. Pattern recognition. Another useful skill childhood gave me. I didn't call him back. I figured he needed time. That's something I've gotten good at over the years, giving people space, even when they never gave it to me. The next day my buddy Phil at work noticed I seemed a little off and asked what was going on. I gave him the short version. He leaned back in his chair and said, "So you're basically doing pro bono consulting for your family, and the one person who can't afford to complain is complaining?" I said, "Yeah. That about sums it up." Phil shook his head and went back to his spreadsheet. Phil's a good guy. Not overly talkative, but he understands situations quickly. A few days later, Graham called again. This time his tone was different. Quieter. He said he'd been thinking. And I want to give him credit for this because it clearly wasn't easy. He said, "I know I messed up my finances, and I know mom and dad spent a lot on me over the years. More than they spent on you. I see that now." I told him I appreciated him saying it. He said, It's weird, Cole. You being the one handling this, it's always been." He stopped. I finished the sentence for him. "It's always been you." I know. But it can't be right now. And honestly, Graham, it probably shouldn't have been. Not like that. We didn't have some dramatic emotional reconciliation. This isn't a movie. But he said okay. Since then he's been, not exactly cooperative, but at least not obstructive. A couple of times he's even asked me for help with his own finances. Those were awkward conversations. The king sitting down with his little brother and admitting he didn't know how to make a budget. I helped him. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I just sat with him and showed him how to track expenses, prioritize debt, and stop the bleeding. He still has a long way to go, but he started. My parents are doing better. The budget is working. My mom has been cooking more meals at home, and this is the part I love. She actually asks me what I want for dinner now. 31 years later. And she finally asks. My dad has been taking on a little handyman work around the neighborhood. It brings in some extra money and keeps him from going stir-crazy during retirement. They both seem lighter now. Less stressed. Last week, my mom said something that stayed with me. "I wish we'd asked for your help sooner. Not just with the money. With everything." I didn't say what I was thinking. Which was, I wish you'd asked sooner too. About a lot of things. For a very long time. And I need to jump in one more time, because this story just came full circle. The kid who spent his childhood eating whatever Graham chose is now managing the family's entire financial menu. The kid who was always told Graham had already decided now gets asked what he wants. Cole didn't explode. He didn't throw the past back in anyone's face. He showed up with a laptop and a spreadsheet and proved that the other one was the one they should have been paying attention to all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's a well-organized Excel document and a phone that rings when the king needs permission to spend. Final update. A few things have happened over the last couple of weeks that I want to mention because they feel important. Or maybe they're small and I'm reading too much into them. I don't know. You decide. First, Graham came to my parents' house for dinner last Sunday. I was there too. We all sat around that kitchen table and my mom had made 3 different dishes, a roast, a pasta dish, and a salad. She set everything out and said, "Everyone pick what you want." Nobody chose for anyone else. Graham took some of everything, I took some of everything. We ate, and it was strange because it was the most normal family dinner we'd ever had. The reason it felt strange was that normal was something we'd never actually experienced. Second, Graham and I went out for coffee. Just the two of us. He didn't ask for money. He didn't complain about the budget. He actually asked me about my job, not casually, genuinely. He asked what my days look like, what parts are difficult, and what I enjoy about it. I told him about a project I'd recently finished, restructuring a parks department budget that had been a mess for 3 years. He said, "That sounds really boring, but also kind of impressive." Which might be the most sincere compliment Graham has ever given me. I'll take it. Third, and this one genuinely got to me. I wasn't expecting it at all. My dad called me last Tuesday, no particular reason. He just called. He said, "Hey, just checking in." We talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular, his handyman jobs, the weather, a show he'd been watching about World War II submarines. At the end of the call, he said, "Thanks for doing what you're doing, Cole. I know I don't say stuff like this enough." I said, "It's okay." He said, "No, it's not, but I'm trying." There's something about hearing your dad say he's trying that hits differently when you're 31. At that age, you've mostly stopped expecting your parents to change. And when they do, even a little, it lands harder than it would have when you were 15 or 20. I still manage the budget. I still do the monthly reviews. I still get the occasional call from Graham asking whether there's room in the plan for something. Last week, he asked if the budget could handle a $60 birthday gift for our mom. I said yes. He said, "Thanks." Then he added, "And I swear this actually happened. What do you think she'd like? You probably know better than me." The king asked me for advice on what our mom would want. I almost fell out of my chair. I told him she'd been wanting a new pair of gardening gloves and a gift card to the nursery down the road. He said, "Perfect, thanks, Cole." That was it. No drama, no power struggle. Just one brother asking another brother for a suggestion. I should also mention that I set Graham up with a basic debt repayment plan, nothing complicated. Just a spreadsheet showing his balances, minimum payments, and a prioritized payoff order beginning with the highest interest cards. I told him that if he stuck with it, he could be through the worst of it in about 3 years. He stared at the spreadsheet for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "You actually enjoy this stuff, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "That's wild. Coming from Graham, that's practically a standing ovation." I don't want to oversell the transformation here. Graham is still Graham. He still has that habit of walking into a room and expecting everyone to rearrange themselves around him. Old habits, but it's softer now. Like the volume got turned down from a 10 to about a 6, and my parents are still learning how to treat us equally after 35 years of not doing that. It's awkward. My mom overcorrects sometimes. She'll ask for my opinion on something and then immediately ask Graham's, like she's keeping score in her head. But she's trying. They're all trying. And I guess that's really all you can ask for. I think about that kitchen table a lot. For years it was the place where I learned that my choices didn't matter. Now it's the place where I sit with a laptop and a budget while everyone in the family listens. Not because I demanded it, not because I threw a fit, but because I showed up, prepared, steady, and ready. The way I've always been. The way nobody noticed until they had to. One last thing. I was at the grocery store last weekend, and I walked past the frozen chicken tenders. Just an ordinary moment in the freezer aisle. But I stopped and stared at them for much longer than I probably should have. A woman standing next to me gave me a strange look. I almost explained but decided not to. Some grudges are just too specific to explain to a stranger in a grocery store. I bought the chicken tenders, by the way. Made them for dinner that night. They were fine. Actually, they were pretty good. I cooked them in the air fryer with some seasoning I found in the back of my cabinet. But the important part is that I also made garlic bread, a Caesar salad, and a side of roasted broccoli because nobody was there to tell me I couldn't. I ate at my own table in my own condo. Food I chose. On my schedule. Simple things. But when you spend your childhood without them, simple things feel enormous. So here's my question for you guys. If you were in my position years of being the overlooked kid, and then suddenly your family needed you, would you have helped with conditions the way I did, or would you have just written the checks and stayed hands off? Part of me wonders if the conditions were too much, but the budget analyst in me knows they were necessary. I don't know. What do you think? Look, Cole didn't blow up at anyone, he didn't cut his family out of his life. He didn't make some dramatic speech at a holiday dinner, he just waited. He built a life. And when the moment came that everyone needed help, he was the only one standing there. That's what happens when you spend your whole childhood being denied. You either crumble or you build. Cole built. And the irony is almost too perfect. The kid who wasn't allowed to choose dinner is now managing the entire family budget. The kid who rode a bike while his brother drove a car is now the one keeping the whole thing on the road. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be ready when they finally come to you. Drop a comment and let me know conditions, or no conditions. Would you have handled it the way Cole did, or would you have done it differently? Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.